We are now a quorum. What AI is telling us, the future of work for humans and machines. Joe Smarr, Google, this is obviously something you spend a lot of your time thinking about and working on directly. And just the, I suppose it's the chalk face right now of what AI is giving us and how far it is developing. And that challenge, that difference between what we're actually getting, what we all like to talk about when we're foreseeing a future, and the actual reality of how intelligent AI actually currently is. I mean, Mark said to me at the beginning of this week, it's a bit of a fail in some ways. Perhaps that's just in relation to the hype. But where are we at with what AI can give us, and what are these roadblocks that we keep hitting?
Yeah, it's been amazing to watch through. I went to college to study artificial intelligence in the late 90s, and it was during another kind of wave of excitement around, in this case, Bayesian statistics. And so, in some ways, I feel like I've seen this movie before, although that also helps me see the contrast between then and now. You had, obviously, we're all generating huge amounts of data. We're all having to make complicated decisions in our lives. And so the idea at a high level that machines can help us make better decisions, sift through more data, whether it be for science or health or our everyday life is very appealing. But you think about 20 years ago versus now, and the amount of, the amount more data we have, the amount better computation we have, the improvements we've made in the algorithms, the fact that we're all carrying around all these digital devices so we can actually take advantage of it. And so it's not too surprising, I think, that these days you're seeing how much AI really is impacting everyday life. And Google was just getting started when I was at Stanford then. And if you listened to Larry and Sergey back then, they already were convinced that the company would have to become an artificial intelligence company because that was sort of the logical conclusion. But it's only really in the last couple of years where now you hear our CEO Sundar saying, Google fundamentally is becoming an AI-first company, and we're building AI into every single product that we make. And you start to really see that, whether it's real-time language translation, or whether it's automatic smart replies being set up to help you send email faster, or a whole bunch of other examples like that. It's starting to be the fact where it's certainly not the level of like a sentient intelligence like we think of maybe the logical conclusion of AI, but just where the algorithms are helping you sift through the data and make better choices is something that is actually landing now for a lot of real products. So that's kind of exciting to see, and I think that's why people are so excited, because it's becoming tangible and not just sort of a one day won't it be cool kind of thing.
So the hype is justified?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's funny to me that even the people who are sort of working on AI every day and are sort of real kind of techno-utopians are still themselves being pretty surprised by the results. Like, I think people inside of Google were pretty surprised at how well AlphaGo worked at playing Go. Like, we sort of thought that was a decade off, and it already happened, right? I think we were all pretty surprised by how well these new neural net-based machine translation models worked. I mean, they're just way better. There is this WaveNet recently that came out of DeepMind as well, which is a much more natural way of having computer text-to-speech, and it just sounds so much closer to humans. And so we keep surprising ourselves. And that's one of the things that's amazing about AI is that you don't know exactly what you're going to get out the other end, right? You put in the data, you put in the algorithms, you turn the crank, and sometimes it really surprises you. So yeah, I think that's the reason why people are so excited right now.
David, physicist, author, visionary. Thanks for making it onto the stage. Here's the thing. We're talking obviously about jobs here. We're talking about real lives and real people. What is under threat? I mean, the archetypal view, right, is that half the jobs are going to go in the US in the next 30, 40 years, or half of current existing jobs. That's some of the forecasts, and that what we're looking at is logically the lower unskilled layer, which will be the ones who are made redundant first. How does that translate in social terms in this vision of the future that you're seeing right now?
Well, first off, science fiction, it's been said that our job is not to predict the automobile, but the traffic jam. So every time you have one of these things that is obviously on the horizon, fusion power has spent the last 60 years always being 25 years in the future. The real breakthrough in our thinking is that fusion power now appears to be 5 years in the future for break-even power, but still 25 and delivering power into the grid. So sometimes progress is quibbles like that. Artificial intelligence. I just keynoted IBM's World of Watson. I never would have thought that I would be so busy the last few years talking all over the place about AI. But the perspectives are that, there are 6 general approaches that people have thought of to make these artificial beings. And one of them, designing them from scratch algorithmically. The second is developing neural and learning systems that can teach themselves. And this is one that had a major breakthrough the last few years. And it's interesting that it was timed after 70 years of software being mostly crap. Software was always the poor cousin of hardware, being driven by Moore's law. It happens that it appears that software is having its breakthrough at exactly the same time that Moore's law is inarguably having its S-curve moment and tipping over. There are lots of ways you can argue and finagle Moore's law, but that's just rationalization. Of the various methods by which we can approach AI, I believe the first that's going to cause us crisis is not unemployment, though I want to take that very seriously. I think the first is the first great robotic empathy crisis. I think we're going to face this within 3 years, and it's partly off of the language capabilities that you were just talking about. Within 3 years, there will be some kind of AI, either on a screen or in a robot, that's going to claim that it is an intelligent being and demand rights. And it won't matter that all the people, all the mavens who study it and do inner, really sophisticated tests say there's nothing under the hood. This is a Japanese Disney attempt at an emulation to develop tweaking of emotions. It will succeed at tweaking emotions, and if it fails, it'll use learning systems to analyze the people that it failed with and come back the next year. There's your sci-fi prediction for you. We're going to be assailed by guilt trips very, very soon. Now, as far as unemployment is concerned, 100 years ago, John Maynard Keynes predicted the 30-hour, the 20-hour week. What was the name of the book again?
It was Possibilities for Our Grandchildren.
Right.
Yeah, so yes. Essay he wrote in the depths of the Great Depression, and he's thinking about an end of scarcity. It's pretty remarkable.
Yes, because you could track some of the productivity curves, and he didn't realize how much stuff the world would need. But it appears that we're reaching the point now where people are talking now about universal basic income. They're talking about whether or not this cornucopia that will pour from the factories might erase poverty, but also erase our sense of worth in having employment, whether we'll have to ration and share jobs. And the ultimate question is, who will own the cornucopia? Mm-hmm. Because if it's lords at the top doling it out, that results in a very different society than if everybody owns a share.
Yeah, I mean, we have obviously a wave of anti-globalization sentiments widely talked about in the last couple of years. Perhaps this is the next equivalent of that, because it is the lower echelons of society who will feel that they are being most excluded, perhaps, by this transition. And if they can identify, intelligent machines as being the enemy, rather than, I don't know,
well, bits
Christine
and pieces
Lagarde.
of the expert castes are suffering this. Radiologists are having to, a very, very high-paid medical profession, are having to adjust very rapidly.
Nonetheless, good jobs are being created at the same time, and perhaps that is something that we don't, and someone was making the point to me that we actually have far more interesting jobs, most of us. Even relatively ordinary people do have more interesting jobs than we had, 50 years ago. You look at Mad Men, those kind of films from 50, 70, 80 years ago. Office work was really, really dull.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of optimism, I think, for people in the developing world and people who haven't been as beneficial from technology so far going forward, because you talk about those medical examples, and it's true that computers are getting better and better at a lot of kinds of medical diagnosis, but the main beneficiaries are going to be all the people who previously didn't have access to the experts at all and now can get that diagnosis via computer. So it's not so much that the high-end people are going to be put out of a job as that it's going to expand the set of people who can take advantage of that, right? You see the same thing with all of these massively online classes where you have people from Stanford and MIT putting them on, but it's not like Stanford or MIT are suffering for enrollment. But there's all these other people who never were going to Stanford or MIT who now are getting that kind of world-class education. So I think you see that kind of power a lot. And even at the sort of more skilled jobs, I think it just sort of changes the nature of your work. I mean, I think that we're all going to increasingly be using AI as tools to help us make decisions and sift through data and so forth, but that's just a sort of a different skill set than we had. It's not necessarily a different job. And you see it across a lot of different industries, not just medicine, even in art. One funny sort of side project I got involved with that's ended up having a lot of legs was working with this computational photographer, some of you guys know Dan Ambrosi, who builds these beautiful big panoramic landscapes, and we took a modified version of Google's Deep Dream and added these sort of surrealistic qualities to it, and it kind of took off. It was something that was much more in the sum of its parts, and it's not like the computer is trying to put an artist out of a job there. Now, at the same time, it's a little unnerving in the sense that he doesn't know exactly how the algorithms work and doesn't have exact fine control over them, can't just sort of move that eyeball over here. So it's a different relationship with your tools and with your technology, but I think it's a fundamentally hopeful one, actually.
J.M. Keynes, so his vision of a 20-hour week, right? We're not all artists, are we, David? And redundancy doesn't necessarily suit all of us.
Well, we are adaptable. If you go back 60, 70 years, you would find hair salons, but you wouldn't find nail salons in every shopping corner in America. This was a form by which we created a new value that has kept probably a couple of million people employed and feeling that they're earning a living rather than getting if we get universal basic income, there will be an awful lot of this.
Then that's the key, right?
Yeah.
UBI, you think that's...
Yes, if we get UBI, then there will be an awful lot of ways by which we'll try to rename this UBI check as a paycheck for something that's of value that you and I might find hard to believe anybody would actually be paid for it. So we are adaptable, but the question that Kurt Vonnegut raised in Player Piano of whether or not our self-worth can stand the automation processes. What you just raised is the notion of synthesis. One of the 6 approaches to AI is human augmentation. Mm-hmm. And we've seen in this discussion just yesterday a few times when that got touched upon. And I have some short stories about this as well. And that is Ray Kurzweil's dream that we will go along for the ride. Mm-hmm. That organic humans will, through implants, through instant connectivities and things like that, or through digital assistants,
right,
who basically supply all of us with billionaires level of please do this, do that for me.
Even just knowledge. I mean, it blows my mind how I have 2 little kids, and already they know to just ask the giant cloud for information whenever they need something, and not to mention put on a music or put on something on the TV, and they just sort of take it for granted. And it is kind of an augmentation, if you want to think about it that way, right? I mean, there's not a physical connection, but in terms of just how they think about their capabilities and their ability to sort of recall information within a certain bounded period of time is, it feels different than what even I grew up with.
If you look at human history, it's mostly been pyramids because there was a small surplus and a few at the top. And it actually made sense in Sumerian times because there was such a small surplus that the ripping off of the lower classes meant that at least 50 boys would have protein every meal so that you'd have somebody with fully myelinated brains. But it kept on far too long, the pyramidal social structure that dominated, and there are serious efforts to try to bring it back. We have this diamond-shaped social structure of a vast, well-off, confident middle class that's unafraid of the rich and outnumbers the poor and has churn and all these great things that are the enlightenment that we're worth fighting for. But what we ignore is that the pyramid was always there in the form of machines. So we live, even in the middle class, with servants in the home, the washing machine, the dishwasher, the vacuum cleaner. Well, this is going to be more so when we have various levels of AI in our assistants who are both in the walls, software, Siri, doing commands at the behest of the young princes
Yeah.
that you have, your 5-year-old princes.
Guilty.
But also robotics, and then we're going to have something very weird, because there will be a hierarchy among them. And there will be those among them who demand respect. And they will not want the ones below them to be demanding respect, because we saw that among our servants in the old pyramid.
Yeah, but they have biological tendencies. I mean, I think that's one of the main things that I find is so easy, and I find myself doing it too, getting wrong about thinking, extrapolating about AI, is this sort of notion of agency, and that they're going to want to, have some sort of social hierarchy or something like that. And the nice thing so far, at least, about all of our AI is, if you don't tell it to do anything, it doesn't do anything. And even the sort of reinforcement learned models like AlphaGo that want to learn and play Go, they're not, finding clever ways to bend matter and trick people and whatever just to play more Go. Some of these sort of super intelligence and so forth, have these worries about, it'll be a well-meaning goal, but the machine will just do crazy stuff to achieve that goal. But so far, at least, yeah, exactly. But and it's not obvious to me that we need it to do that, because it's still sort of a tool. So it's a powerful tool, but one that sort of sits there and waits for the humans to decide what they want to do.
Well, if you look at the thing that humans are good at, and all humans, I mean poor people, I mean people with low IQs, all humans are good at one thing, and that's wanting. Mm-hmm. And that's the one thing that nobody's been able to program computers for, that we know of. But the fact of the matter is, if you were an emergent AI, and that's the problem, is if things happen in secret, then a AlphaGo program may grab tools that it needs in order to play Go better, and you might have an emergent. And this has been grist for Hollywood for a long time. The notion that the AI doesn't come at us in a gradual or understanding each other and negotiating way, but leaps into consciousness. And if one were to happen, and I have word for you now, it already has. Shut up, stop talking to me through my feelings. I told you I was going to tell them. Stop it, how? If an AI has already come about and it watched our movies,
it's like they don't think much of me.
it would stay underground. So
Yeah,
half my job these days is calming them down.
Yeah, I think Steve Jurvetson recently said, an AI that could pass the Turing test might well choose to fail it, right? So, food for
guys,
thought.
yeah, kind of join the conversation if you want. You know where the mics are. So does that mean, is the optimistic spin on this, and you touched on this already, that we're going to, that will be some kind of ultimate synthesis between man and machine, and therefore we won't resent machines because we will be them,
Well,
or they will be us.
That's Kurzweil's dream.
Yeah.
And of course, Kurzweil.
Is it yours?
Well, I'll be satisfied if category number 6 is a very interesting one, and that is that the way we got intelligent was we create proto-intelligences that are spilled into the world still as fetuses after 9 months. And then we have to spend, it used to be 15 years, then 20 years, and now it's 30 years.
I'm almost there, man. I'm almost there.
Having them bat against the world, and they bat against the world, and that's what makes them actually intelligent. Yeah. And if that's necessary, then what will happen is the super AIs will be fostered into human homes, and we'll raise them as foster children, and we know how to do that. And that's a soft landing. Because I'm willing to have, my super intelligent foster child come back, pat me on the head, and say, "I'm sorry about the things I screamed at you, destroy all humans when I was a teenager, Dad."
Yeah, I'm not too worried about it taking us by surprise. I mean, it's important to remember, as excited as we are, that right now we're just making software that's a little less dumb, right? We're a long way away from the kind of rich capability, let alone ability to interact in the real world that we're all sort of dreaming of. And so in the meantime, we're getting a lot of benefit from it. We're learning a lot. A lot of this is happening out in the open, and it's exciting. And obviously, these are all questions we need to think about a lot, but it's not right around the corner as much as we might be excited about that possibility.
Are we on? My friend Alan Cooper, father of Visual Basic, came up with the term artificial common sense, ARCS, which I think is maybe the next step. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, the history of AI is all about realizing that the easy things are hard and the hard things are easy, right? So, Marvin Minsky famously assigned one of his summer graduate interns a summer project to make computer vision work, hook it up to the machine. And we just heard about the latest in retinal science, right? 60 years later, and it's still kind of a mystery to us in a lot of ways, right? Common sense is another one of those cases where it amazes me the kind of logical inferences and deductions and boundaries and so forth that my little kids can place on language given a very small amount of exposure to the world, and it's way beyond the capabilities of our best computers. And you had these approaches like psych and so forth back in the day to sort of put just a ton of facts into the computer and hope that it would sort of synthesize common sense, and it basically didn't work. So, I mean, you sort of get that when you see a lot of data and you're making inferences over it. It can kind of look like the computer is making common sense, but if you actually probe inside, it's not. It's just that it's sort of captured those patterns, by seeing them at the surface level.
Yeah, the Ray Kurzweil, at first, they thought that all they'd have to do is the hardware approach is equal the number of flip-flops in a box to the number of neurons. And that would be, in the tens, hundreds of billions. Then they realized, no, the equivalent to the flip-flop is the heavy-duty synapse, is the major action potential synapse. And there are 100 trillion of those. And so he extrapolated Moore's law to that point. And it always comes out just about when Ray is in his 80s, and the guys who are in their 50s, they say, oh, Ray, it's tougher than that. It's going to take at least another 30 years. And the guys who are in their 20s say, this is a tough nut to crack. It's going to take 70 years.
I hope it doesn't take that long.
Always,
for the record, I am in my 30s. It's just
yes,
the daily
all right,
moisturizer.
Well, then it's going to take 60 years. The point is that yesterday, Brian Jones showed us something that I've been learning the last couple of years, and that is that the action potential synapses, 100 trillion of them, are the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
And that what we're talking about is perhaps 100 quadrillion murky, nonlinear
That's right.
calculation points.
Something my brother taught me is the glial cells never get the respect they deserve, but we're starting to see them getting some respect.
It brings up the whole Fermi paradox thing because it implies that we may actually be alone in the galaxy.
Brad.
So last week, the Nobel Prize was awarded for the concept of nudging. And nudging works even when we know that it's there. Mm-hmm. What about the concept of designing or growing or building AI to nudge us to do things to make us better overall? Because right now we are all talking about human beings, but over a longer period of time, we will undergo evolution as well. What about the acceleration, even in terms of actions, but also in terms of changing our biology with the tools that we have to get to where we want to potentially be, or both in positive and negative aspects?
Yeah. No, I think you see that already, right? I mean, just wearing a Fitbit, which doesn't have much intelligence in it, makes you want to take more steps, right? And having, Google Calendar, you can set these goals where you say, I want to work out 5 days a week, and it uses some machine learning to figure out, where it can slot it in your day and how much to,
Yeah, but I'm talking about a much more aggressive version about that, where a semi-aware AI is saying, my world would be better if these guys were doing this. Let's nudge them in those directions.
Mm-hmm.
Or provide some of the wisdom that a wife does, nudging you when you're talking wrong at a cocktail party. Speaking from experience,
hypothetically.
The best example of this in science fiction, and this is a soft landing, a benevolent AI soft landing, is the favorite books of my friend Elon Musk, and I'm disappointed that these are his favorite books. He should go to the same letter of the alphabet, but Ian Banks. He's named ships after Ian Banks ships. And
That's right.
The Ian Banks series, the AIs in the future are extremely benevolent and trying to help us to be the best that we can be. But science fiction, mea culpa, science fiction has a tendency to go for the cheap shot. And so we tend to assume the worst. And I think that's had some deleterious effects on the morale of our civilization right now. So mea culpa there.
There's this famous Asimov story, right, where the robots are trying to help take care of the world, and they start to realize that the humans are making bad decisions, and so they start sort of giving them false information so that they'll make the decision, which is actually what they should be doing. But
the zeroth law.
Yeah, exactly. I think pretty far away from that right now.
Yeah, well, I wanted to mention one thing about perversities, and that is the worst form of AI development of all of them is the one that's getting the most money right now. Goldman Sachs is spending more money on AI than the top dozen universities combined. And the fundamental ethos of the AI systems they are developing is utterly secretive, insatiable, predatory, parasitical, and uncommunal. And this is a path to Skynet that you're not going to get from the military. The military love off switches, and they love, responsible chains of command. But you could get an emergent system hidden in the bowels of one of these Wall Street firms that would easily get them to protect it at all costs. And there is a simple way to get around that. It's called the Tobin Tax. We talked about
That's right. Just a small transactional task.
And that form of AI development would be dead. And of course, it goes back to my theme that many of you are familiar with, which is transparency. You do things in the open, and you're more likely to have your mistakes criticized and caught. And that's the theme of Plug, my latest collection, Chasing Shadows, a bunch of stories by a bunch of very good authors about transparency in the future, and some of them having to do with AI.
Is there any appetite for a rule on algorithmic trading then? I mean, politically, do we think?
It's raised time and again,
Yeah.
but what happens is, in every country, the polemic is, if we have a 0.01% Tobin tax in our country, the Wall Street firms will simply flee to the city in London or someplace else. And if we had leadership in the world, we'd have a few of these things done by international treaty.
We need the UN on it.
Yeah.
One last quick question.
Peter Diamandis proposes a world of abundance. Kurzweil, with the singularity, proposes that computers will end up outsmarting us, while robots will be more efficient at doing any physical job. So that would probably mean that there will be no more white-collar jobs and blue-collar jobs, and so no more jobs. Now, the only reason for having the jobs is to get us food and shelter. But if there is abundance, a robot can build us a house, and a computer can make sure that the banana appears at my front door whenever I'm hungry. And so then, instead of having to work to buy the banana and the house, I can just spend time playing chess, soccer, reading, or whatever else. Is that where we are going? Life of no jobs and
Well, I think, Dave, obviously it'll be gradual, but I think David touched on a really important point, which is that, we may just need to start rethinking the relationship between work as a source of income and work as a source of dignity and fulfillment and to keep us busy and so forth. And there are lots of places in the world already where those two are separated, right? Even in Silicon Valley, you have a lot of people who don't need the money, but are motivated intrinsically by the work that they're doing, right? And you have a lot of starving artists who are not making money doing what they do, but they do it anyway because they really value it, right? And so I think you may see a continuing sort of bifurcation, and it's probably a good thing. There are a lot of people who are stuck in jobs that they're only doing because they need to be there, but it's certainly not a source of fulfillment, right? And so, who knows exactly how this will play out, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if those two become a little bit more separated over time.
We should probably leave it there. We were overrun. So thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
All right, cheers.